I am fortunate to be wearing two hats, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes sequentially. One is from Yale University, where I have a lab that does cross-cultural research and reading, among other things. So we've been working in a number of languages, both transparent and not so transparent. And I also have been affiliated with a number of Russian universities. Currently, I lead a lab that is called the Translational Sciences of Early Childhood Lab. And today I'm going to be actually reflecting, just like my colleagues have done, on the 4 years between the two forums. At the forum in 2010, I commented on the properties of Russian, and with a certain amount of pride, I said that we have been traditionally an educational system that has a very high literacy rate. It's been cited many times in a number of sources, including Alexander's book, as one of the strongest educational systems in the world. And I have to tell you, unfortunately, that the last 4 years have been highly disruptive and destructive of what that system was. And what we currently have is something that is in a very sad state. So unfortunately, this 4 years since the Forum of 2010 have not been celebratory for us. And what I mean here when I say by us, I mean I'm not talking about the number of studies we published collectively as a field, or my colleagues in Russia published in Russian language. It doesn't mean that we haven't understood reading difficulties better or whatnot. But what I mean is that it hasn't been a productive conversation for us with policymakers. And we are, as I said, a system that has been recognized traditionally as a very strong system, in particular of teaching reading. And there are historical reasons for that. Some of them are very well known to many of my colleagues in this audience. The first countrywide phonics-based instruction, kind of direct teaching of reading on the largest territory in the world for one of the largest populations in the world has happened in Soviet Russia. And we can't forget about that. The best early literacy books, including azbukas and alphabet-based bookwarys, have been written by Russian scientists. And the name of Vilkonin, for example, is very well known to many people, including to those who promote phonics-based and phonemic awareness-based instructions in the United States. We have also had traditionally a very strong system of special education. And what was characteristic of that system, for 50 years at least, was a very strong preventive orientation. Now I should say that just like Finns do now, we did that 20 years ago, and we did that for 50 years in a row. Unfortunately, we don't do that anymore. Finns, who started doing it substantially later than the Soviet educational system started doing that, are still promoting a lot of preventive attitude toward potential reading failure, studying, educating their children in a particular way as soon as they discover their weaknesses, and being, again, highly preventive about potential failures. We have had a remarkable system of kindergarten support for children who were potentially at risk for later reading failure. And now I'm really sad to say that both systems have been under attack. And one big reason for that is that both systems are quite expensive, because one assumes a very rigorous system of teacher prep. Our teachers have been educated in a particular venue for at least 6 years, and then with multiple continuous educational programs and so forth. Now we send teachers into classrooms after 4 years of college. That hasn't been an issue before. And also we, being zealously oriented toward Europe, have accepted a number of policies that have been promoted by the European Union and various international agreements, in particularly the orientation towards inclusive education, which for the first time in the history of our education has been mandated as a law only 4 years ago, right? So prior to that, we've had a very strong special ed system that was both inclusive and exclusive. Now, as a result of this law, we virtually destroyed the exclusive special education system. Now we're all inclusive, but the system is completely not ready for that, including the system that used to support children with special needs in reading. So, I mean, where does the attribution of this new developments go to? Well, part of the issue here is that the country now is run primarily by accountants, not even economists, but accountants. And we have experienced a number of very unfortunate decisions pertaining to our social services in general and education in particular, that go back to teacher-like models only in Russian flavor, and that's even worse, that if it could be. So all of that kind of resulted in a couple of things, and I'm going to illustrate only 2 of them. So in 2010, I mentioned this particular creature only briefly by saying that we are now developing a system of standardized tests that in our case would be both a graduation from high school and an entrance exam to colleges. Now we have that thing that is called in Russian ЕГЭ and translate as the common, standardized, or unified, depending what word you prefer better, state exam. So all of our high school graduates, if they want to continue their education, have to take this thing, and or if they want to finish their education at high school, they don't want to stay, let's say, for the 12th year, they need to take this exam, and they could do it during their 11th year. So the tradition of the system has been that prior to this exam, we have not had a very strong orientation towards standardized system. We were completely criteria-oriented, right? So people like Elkonin, who contributed to the creation of a number of textbooks, have developed some ideas that were theory-based, because I dare to say that they knew something about reading and how to teach it in Russian. And based on these ideas, they developed textbooks that then were evaluated for their efficacy. And there was a serious generation of studies that evaluated the efficacy of these textbooks. But our system had been criticized then for its tremendous unification, that there was no variation in how reading or math or history was taught in the Soviet Russia. There was one single textbook, and everybody was on the same page across 12 zones of that country. Every single third grader was on the same page of a given textbook on the same day. And certainly, you know, you could treat that in a number of different ways, but now we do have the standardized exam. And I'm just going to share with you 3 years of data from the standardized exam. These years are 12, 13, and now they just released the data. Actual admissions to higher education institutions was completed just about 2 weeks ago, so these data are still preliminary. So you can see in these graphs, and I'm going to show you 2 graphs, and that's how everything that pertains to language art is captured in these exams. This is Russian language, and the next graph would be on language arts or literature, however you want to define it. So the items are in multiple formats, and you could see that this is, again, a criterion-oriented assessment, and the graphs show average for the whole country, boys and girls, and also R stands for rural, and U stands for urban. And you can see that in general, it's a fairly well-constructed test, that you don't see profound gender differences that you see in many other assessments, and you don't see profound rural versus urban differences, right? So this is a good thing, but the bad thing is that even our best students, right, those who perform at the highest level, we have very few of them, and our averages are pretty low, right? So, and also, if you see what happened from the 2013, when the average was 63.94, in 2014, the average became 62.5. This thing, the exam, has been introduced to masses. There were some practice years, but in masses it was administered in the country since 2006, gradually, region by region. Now the whole country takes it. So, and you could see a pronounced slide down, and it's even more pronounced is for language arts. So the level of performance is lower. And, the performance in 2014 is 6 standard units lower than the performance was in 2013. Now, you'd say, well, this is the internal data, but, and unfortunately, I was not here yesterday, so I don't know if you've already talked about international comparison studies or not. I haven't heard much today about them. But of course, if you look at PISA data, that also gives you a certain amount of anchoring with regard to how children do comparing to other children in the world, right? So PISA, again, has its own pluses and minuses. It's been both praised and criticized depending on whom you talk to. But it recently released is 2012 data. And I apologize for not marking that properly, but you could see that Russia is just slightly above the United States, which is not a compliment to either of the countries, because on average, they're below average of the international average or OECD average, okay? So my fundamental question is that is kind of captured in this set of comments. I mean, maybe it's a sign of aging, and I'm the first one to acknowledge that, because I really care more and more about what it means for all we do. As I said, in terms of comparatively, Russian science probably, Russian Science of Reading has published quite a number of papers between 2010 and 2014. We have certainly voiced our concerns at all levels, but none of our concerns have penetrated through the very thick shields of the government And none of the scientists I know have been asked to contribute either to the development of the exam or related policy conclusions with regard to the inclusion law. So, I mean, this is kind of the bitter truth, if you wish, but this is where we are. And I think it's very important to realize these concerns and not, be ashamed about saying, and I'm of course talking only about our experience and our ineffectiveness, that what we have seen for the last 4 years since the previous forum is really not connecting, theory and field work and science to practice, but really disconnecting it from practice. Thank you for your attention.